Hello, my name is Paul.
And my name is Matt.
And you are listening to Couch Potatoes.
This week we're going to be discussing cartoons.
And not just any cartoons, they're our favorite cartoons. You might remember some of them even. First show we're going to talk about is Kablam. It was on Nickelodeon. It ran from 1996 to 01. That's 4 seasons for those of you who can't count. Although it seems like 5, that isn't the case, so don't fight with me. They brought in a lot of different aspects of animation. They brought in stop animation as well as clay animation, and they all actually even had cartoons. What was your favorite thing, Matt?
Probably my favorite segment on Kablam was like a pre-Robot Chicken series called Action League Now, which took like these regular action figures you'd find on the bottom of like your toy box. You know, you got the naked buff wrestler, you've got the superhero chick who's kind of like Barbie. You have like the G.I. Joe action figure with flippers and stuff, and then you kind of have the mismatched action figure who's like a melted dude that you'd leave outside for a couple of days. Well, basically the plot was there really wasn't a plot. These guys were basically a band of superheroes that would go out in their remote control car and fight crime. And actually, most of the crime was caused by, ironically enough, a character called the Mayor, who was the Mayor, and he apparently was very evil. He'd drive around in red wheel wagons and throw, china plates off things. He would tie little rubber babies to, underneath the tires of a monster truck. Just really weird, comical stuff. And obviously Action League Now, for being, a very powerful super league, the characters themselves were very weak and horrible. Well, other than that show, what was your favorite segment from Kablam?
I actually had a couple. My favorite would have to be Prometheus and Bob. It dealt with an alien who tried to teach a caveman how to do like ordinary tasks, like make a fire or build a little building.
And this one was done in claymation, right?
Yeah, it was done in claymation, and I guess the antagonist of that segment would be a monkey.
A monkey?
You remember the monkey?
I do remember the monkey.
He would mess with the alien, and to be honest, it's interesting how life form is supposed to be so much superior to the ones on Earth, especially humans.
Right.
How a monkey can spoil all of his plans.
That's right. Monkeys. Well, our next show we're going to be discussing is Cow and Chicken. Yes, this was actually a show, if you don't remember it. This aired on Cartoon Network, but it actually didn't start on the ground up as its own series. The show actually made its first appearance on a show on Cartoon Network called What a Cartoon, or later to be known as the Cartoon Show. And actually this show was the launching point for a lot of other animated shows that got their own series on Cartoon Network, like the Powerpuff Girls, Courage the Cowardly Dog, and I think Family Guy too, which is very interesting.
Really? I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. Right. But the series actually premiered on July 7th, 1997, and ran for 52 episodes. The show was also created by animator David Feiss.
Yeah, did you know Johnny Bravo was actually on the Cartoons?
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's how that started out as well. I wouldn't be surprised if they started out around the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they all had that whole segment where they had
They
a block.
actually did start at the same time, July 7th, 1997.
That's very interesting, yeah. The main characters, obviously, were Cow, who was a girl cow, and her younger brother, Chicken, who was, in fact, a chicken. And they lived in a regular house, which was kind of weird, in a small residential area with Mom and Dad.
And you never saw Mom and Dad.
That's
you only
right.
saw their legs.
That was a running joke on the show, that you would never see Mom and Dad. And in fact, all the things they did in the show, they did with only their 2 feet, like driving a car, fixing sandwiches, and launching giant pig butts out of a catapult.
Yes.
Another character on the show was called the Red Guy, who looked like the devil, and his whole thing was that he was pantsless. Everything he did was without pants, and he would actually dress up in different costumes and make characters out of himself to usually either scam or, harm Cow and Chicken. And actually, his name that he would create for these personas was a play on words of him not having any pants. Like when he would dress up as a police officer, he would be called Officer Pantsofsky. When he was like a regular person or another character, he'd be like someone like Ben Pants. Well, much like Invader Zim, none of the episodes are really linear. They're pretty much self-contained in their own little world. Nothing was really resolved, but something always happened by the end of the episode.
And if I remember, they played a lot on the cows and udders. I vaguely remember the udders sitting on the chicken's head a lot.
Yeah, they got away. They kind of pushed the envelope for what was considered children's cartooning.
Well, especially with the red guy. Like you said, he didn't wear pants, but if you remember, he bounced around on his bottom, I guess, or butt,
his
whatever
butt,
you want to call it. He bounced around that all the time.
And not only that, but they also had this running joke along with their parents not having anything from the waist up. They had a favorite meal. It was called pork butts and taters.
Yes, I remember that too.
Yeah, and like I said before, giant pig butts being thrown out of a catapult, and they would force themselves into the characters' mouths, and they would giant pig butt coming out of their mouth.
Leaving cow and chicken, we're going to go to another animal. Actually, we're going to go to Rocco's Modern Life. That aired on Nicktoons. It was created by Joe Murray. It aired for 4 seasons from 93 to 96. I know that's 3 years, but it's 4 seasons. Once again, don't fight with me. He was a wallaby. He lived in the city of a place called O-Town. It's kind of funny because everything in that town had the word or letter O in it.
Really?
Like the place he worked at was called Lot O Comics. The big corporation that was there was called Conglomerate O. Everything it had dealt with the letter O.
Wow, I didn't know that.
The producer or the guy who created it really had a thing for that. He thought it was funny how these big corporations take everything and take the individuality out of it, make it into one thing.
Wasn't there also a running joke that Rocco, he is a wallaby, that's his character, but everyone would confuse him with a kangaroo, and he would have to correct them.
And it's interesting you say it because he is from Australia. Maybe that's why they thought it, but that is funny. Some of the other characters were the cow. What was his name? Heifer. And Filbert the turtle. You remember him?
I remember them. And that was another thing that was interesting. That Heifer, even though he was a cow, he lived with a family of wolves.
Yes, he was adopted.
Mm-hmm.
And then they also played on the thing of being estranged from your family with the turtle, Filbert, as well. Do you remember the episode where he started going through a migration pattern?
No, I don't remember that.
Yeah, he went back to the big island. He actually got a volcano looked like on his back, and they couldn't figure out what was happening. He got like in a trance state and ended up going back to his homeland to lay eggs. And then to leave, it was quite interesting.
That's actually pretty informative for like a cartoony show. That's kind of what turtles do. I mean, they have like that natural instinct to go somewhere and lay eggs.
Yeah, well, the show was also made for adults. You can see that with the sexual innuendos.
Mm-hmm.
Most definitely with, if you recall, Mr. and Mrs. Bighead.
Oh, their neighbors. They were supposed to be frogs, but they looked like giant. Actually, they're named the big-headed green things.
Exactly. If you recall her specifically, she was what we would now call a cougar.
Mm-hmm.
She was one cougar.
Really, the show was a coming-of-age show. If you remember, Rocco actually moved from Australia, and he was a young man, I guess, by the standards, and was trying to sow his wild oats, if you will, in America. The same thing with Heifer.
Right, his best friend, the cow.
You remember when he moved away from home?
That's right. He moved out of his parents' home, the wolves, and he actually moved into the Choky Chicken, which was like kind of like KFC in their universe. And actually, the name Choky Chicken is another sexual innuendo. Choking the chicken.
They actually had to take it off for a season. They changed the name to another name. I can't recall what it was offhand, but they did change the name of the Choky Chicken for a season.
Interesting. Well, anyways, he moved to the Choky Chicken, but he moved into what appeared to be like the sign for the restaurant, which was like a rotating giant chicken on a stick. So he moved inside of there, and he lived inside this giant rotating chicken.
Yeah, I remember that. He was a very big fan of eating there. I think he actually may have worked there at one point.
Right. And actually, this is another part of the whole coming of age thing, because not only did he move out of his parents' home, but he had to deal with a roommate, and he had a roommate who was actually a cockroach.
I don't remember that, really?
Yep. He had a cockroach roommate, and then the cockroach roommate would, he would mess everything up. It got really stinky and smelly. He had his friends over, and then at that point, Heffer realized that, living on his own was fun because he wasn't with his parents, but he couldn't deal with, the real world problems at that point. He was not ready for it.
And I remember his dad was very hard on him as well.
Right.
Which is another part of coming of age. I guess the rebellious part, or whatever you would want to call it.